The Kondratieff cycle, the economic long wave. So this short video is to help you understand the Kondratieff cycle and a little bit of a background of how I fell into understanding this social cycle. And that is a key point, a social cycle. So I'm going to go through this pretty standard, and I know this is on a video, so you can stop it and start it to take more information as you need be. So I hope by the end of this, you'll be able to understand in simplicity why this Kondratieff cycle, or the economic long wave, this generational cycle, puts order in the chaos of helping us understand how the real economy does work. That's going to be my challenge. Okay, Nikolai Kondratieff. His background and his story is important to know. And the reason for it is that without him, we wouldn't have discovered this evolutionary economic system. So about him, he was born March 4th, 1892, just north of Moscow, in a peasant family, and he was tutored at the St. Petersburg Russian Academy, and he became part of the Socialist Revolutionary Party. Now, his initial profession, of course, was in agricultural economics and statistics, but he was trying to understand the food cycles and how the food supplies would be distributed in this new communist regime that was president in the Soviet Union at the time. The most important thing to know about Kondratieff is that he was a Marxist socialist, and he was studying this capitalist system that was emerging in the United States and ran for a century and a half in the UK. And he was reporting to Stalin. Now, what's amazing, he reported back to Stalin, and he articulated that this capitalist system would collapse, and which Stalin was very happy to hear, but it would come back stronger than ever. And because of that so-called, let's say, a curse, he was actually sent to Siberia for 10 years in prison during the Great Purge, and then his gulags assassinated or killed him, simply for discovering this evolutionary economic system, which is amazing. So that is why there's a lot of us, there's a lot of individuals who dedicate their works to him. He's the one that laid the foundation to understand these cycles and how progress is not linear, but it goes through these different cycles. Now, his most famous work was The Long Waves in Economic Life. And this book really laid the foundation in the different cycles that were occurring, the business cycle, the real estate cycle, and the long wave itself. And that looks like something like this. Now, that sounds or looks as some kind of random noise in the system if you look at it, but it actually has a great forecasting ability, which Schumpeter alluded to in the future. Now, this is the original works, actually, Schumpeter, when he was plotting the long wave, and there are different cycles, as you can see, that had the downturn into the Great Depression and, of course, the recovery. And this is what Kondratieff was known for. Okay, the long wave has had 4 cycles since about 1780. We're at the point of completing the 4th wave, or the 4th cycle, right? It's like a sine wave, goes up and down, right? And if you look at this peak here, K4 peak as I labeled it, that was actually in the 70s. And you can see I've updated the chart here, and this cycle or long wave should be bottom in the 2030s. So they're just waves of progress. Now, the key point in understanding and putting these together was done by Schumpeter and in his famous book, Business Cycles. Now, I'm just going to give you a little bit of the background. He actually named and acknowledged Kondratieff for his works in the business cycles and how this capitalist system works. Now, this is another drawing. This is thanks to share links, Nikolai, who I used to know on the LongWave forum. And you can see that these cycles, they're different in length, and we're still in the down wave. But you can see we have these periodic cycles since the capitalist system really took hold. Now, some people have seen this, the Kondratieff cycle. The most important thing to understand and to simplify it, a lot of scholars and individuals have separated the long wave in 4 different seasons. Spring was about 1946 to about 1966. We had summer where the economy is overheating from 66 to about 81. 81 until recently, this is the down wave or the monetary wave. Some people call it the financial renaissance, where the financial industry, takes over because its product, which is credit, takes over, and it causes Ponzi finance. And then winter is a purging of that. And we're about to enter into economic winter. And again, the seasons are there to simplify, right? So the long wave has these seasons. They're not fixed cycles. They just reflect the social cycle, and they just repeat throughout history. You can backdate all these. Now, the next thing is also to understand is that there are social moods in all of these, and certain investments that do really well because we have rising inflation, overheating inflation, then we have falling inflation or disinflation, and then economic winter, and there's certain things that will outperform very well. Now, if you want to delve into this, a friend of mine or somebody I knew on the LongWave forum wrote a great technical book on the Kondratieff cycle. It's one of my favorites simply because it's very technical, and it might be overbearing for a lot of people, or there's too much information, but it'll help you understand what drives these cycles. And when I came to understand these cycles, I didn't come from a point of an economic background. I just, I'm a typical Canadian raised by or second generation Italian from my parents who immigrated here. And I got involved in the financial business back in '89 at the time real estate was collapsing. And I was really trying to figure out how things work. So I was exposed to different philosophies, and my initial thinking, believe it or not, was more Marxist socialist I read because of my parents were immigrants working in factories who slaved away and didn't have, the wages were, meager, but it was enough. But the economy wasn't overheating in terms of asset inflation, so they were able to acquire and have a Canadian lifestyle. That is almost impossible to have today because of the asset inflation in real estate. But so those who want to really understand this is a book I highly recommend. Now, the one thing about the Kondratieff cycle that I want to make clear, and let's simplify this and go through it slowly. What drives the upwave is technology. And technologies that are disruptive to the economy, and the last one, of course, was automobile, oil and gas. If you look at the mortgages was actually something new because we never had long-term mortgages. But really what drove this with some kind of innovation that increased productivity and was able to generate wealth for the middle class, which we've never seen in history. But like everything has limits to growth, and then the cycle ends. Simply there's too much debt in the system. So the financial economy takes over, and then it overwhelms the real economy, and then you get economic winter. Impossible to stop. Central banks and governments will attempt it, but it won't work. Ultimately, we're going to have economic winter. This book by Chris Freeman is one of my favorite because it just deals with the technological aspect and how it changes society and the social cycle. I highly recommend this book to really come to understand exactly how it does work. Another great book by Carlota Perez is this Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital. And what she does very well is separate the upwave and the downwave, where the downwave is the financial sector, or as she calls it, the casino takes over, and that's never sustainable because what drives economic growth is technologies that create productivity, which creates wealth, which creates an economy basically that where it can grow, and governments are able to acquire wealth in the form of taxes to provide the social programs. Now, the next thing is another area to look at. I'm referencing books because I always know there are a group of people who are interested in understanding the long wave. And each of these books are different. The difference with this book is the specific aspect of how to allocate your capital in the long wave. And this sort of completes it, because if you read these books, each one is different. Each one focuses on different aspects of the long wave. That was kind of frustrating for me. And then I thought, why not put it together? And why not simplify the message? And this helped me actually develop a model when I was learning technical analysis in the late 1990s, and everything made sense. All these books were coming out about that time. So the all-season investor is actually how to construct a long wave tactical asset allocation model. That's what this does, and alludes to Kondratieff. Now, those other books that I mentioned, they talk about the aspects of the Kondratieff cycle, demographics, how certain industries perform when the financial industry dominates the economy. But why not put them all together? And that's the intent of this website, right? And this service is really to articulate the message in a simple format so we can utilize this great forecasting tool. And let me give you some background. I spent 23 years as a financial advisor. And because of learning and understanding risk, I was able to avoid capital losses for my clients in 2000 and 2007. But unfortunately, we saw after 2012 that governments and central banks were going to kick the can down the road and think that they can prevent economic winter, which is impossible. You know, we're running out of that road sometime after 2024. Okay, let's get back to Carlota Perez's book. And these are, as she illustrates here, in 5 surges of development over the past 240 years. And this is just a technological aspect, right? This is what drives each long wave. So we can see the Industrial Revolution, machines, factories, and canals. Then the second one, which is the age of steam, coal, iron, and railways. The third one, which is the age of steel and heavy engineering. And we saw that in the late 1800s as we were going through economic winter. The one we're completing is the age of automobile, oil, petrochemicals, and mass production. And as you can see, she alludes to that this arrow is only halfway through. And the reason for that is the internet is not completed, right? The internet is really laying the foundation for the next upwave. And that is technology is built during the down waves, and then it's utilized in force in the next upwave, probably sometime post 2040, give or take 5 years. But the key is that once everybody will have internet access, and that looks like it should be completed by the end of this decade, there are layers of technologies that are being built on that. Not only is the internet, but computing power. We're looking at Bitcoins being built on that so people can transact around the world. So all these technologies are emerging to build the next wave, and in the sense of the fifth wave. We do have, if you look at it very closely, we do have the next wave, and I believe this could be the end, possibly the end of capitalism with the next wave. And the reason is because of nanotechnology and molecular manufacturing. I saw, this was 10 years ago, Ray Kurzweil came to Toronto, and I asked him, the replicator, Star Trek, when he believes that will be viable. And I was shocked that he believed that that's going to occur by the end of the century. Now, it makes sense when you take a look at 3D printing, artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, molecular manufacturing, these converging 3D printing technologies converge to actually create the world of abundance. But you could only imagine if that technology was invented, how disruptive it would be to society. I mean, it just would collapse everything because it just would be so disruptive to society as a whole. Now, that's probably beyond my lifespan, but that's a possibility for a lot of people born today, that could become a reality. But for now, we have a system that's going to be changing moving forward. So as you can see, it's technologies that are driving the long wave, and then unsustainable debt, unproductive debt that causes its collapse and a deleveraging, so to speak. Now, I'm going to use the US here as an example because it does have the 4 different long waves, and you can see private debt and the deleveraging. And you can see the peaks there before economic winter. The first one, 1836, and you see private debt collapses. 1875, 1929. I know there's that loop in 1933, but that was because the economy was collapsing. And then you can see Americans deleverage dramatically in 1945, and then the next credit cycle. And that was a peak in 2020, but up until 2022, you can see we're about 154%. And so that next part of the long wave hasn't occurred, which is a deleveraging. Now, for Canada, you can see this cycle here that we came in 1946, an economic winter, probably into 2030s. And that's just a growth curve, right? The top line is economic growth, and it slows, and then economic winter, so the next cycle can regenerate and move forward. To see that clearly this is Canada's GDP annualized since 61, and you can see the secular slowing, that every decade economic growth is slower and slower and slower. And to a point, sometime post 2024, we won't have economic growth because the amount of debt within the economy is overburdening the economy, and we're going to get a great deleveraging. Some people call it a depression, but we don't know exactly what it'll look like outside of, there'll be bankruptcies, restructuring of the economy, debt deleveraging, a whole bunch of, let's say, clearance of the system, right? And Kondratieff himself called it a cleansing. Because you need that cleansing, the burning down of the trees before you can start another cycle. some people think that we have cycle upon cycle and just moving upward. No, there's always the waves that will generate the cycle moving forward. Now, theoretically, I've used Ray Dalio's book here. I like this about, that's the long wave and the other business cycles. And debt accumulation started in 46. Is it, or has it peaked in 2022? I believe that this, sometime between now and 2025, we're going to get a peak, and then we're going to have economic winter, which will be deleveraging. That'll last into the 2030s. And as you can see, I pointed out the Kondratieff fifth wave, sometime 2040 to 2095. That's hypothetical. I don't know for sure. We have to see what happens. But the most important aspect is that this cycle isn't thwarted. It's a social cycle. It's reflective of society, right? Because let me put it this way. If you think about anything in life, there is a cycle. And when you look at that chart, you understand that these cycles or sine waves don't go straight up, right? It does this. So that's why you get a boom and a bust. You get economic growth, economic collapse, and then you get economic growth again because society resets. So it's impossible. If you understand the concept of energy, it is theoretically impossible to prevent a bust. If you don't want to have a massive bust, don't have a huge economic boom predicated on unproductive debt that doesn't drive the economy. And real estate fits that. People think that real estate is part of capitalism. That is inherently false. Real estate is a place to live. People invest in real estate and it's an inflationary benefit, but to acquire income or an income stream. True capitalism, as Schumpeter and Kondratieff understood, were products or services that became cheaper, and which would increase the adoption rate, right? So if you looked at any technology, this is a classic example, right? If you look at this technology, and I was one of those first early adopters in cell phones, and how far we've come. They've gotten better, they've become cheaper, so the average person, an everyday person, has a cell phone today. It was unheard of when it first was innovated. So if you look at the growth industries today of the internet, the computers, renewable energy, solar, artificial intelligence now, which is booming, 3D printing, genomics, stem cells. What are these technologies, or what's happened to these technologies? They're improving dramatically, and the costs are plummeting. And as the cost keeps falling, it falls faster than even the inflation rate, and it falls faster than incomes, even if they're stagnant. So what it means, there will be a price point where more and more people can afford it, and that's the capitalist system, right? It drives technology to become better and cheaper, and that increases the adoption rate. So if you look at any kind of growth and growth industry, to simplify it and remember this simple rule, is that any technology where the marginal cost of production or its service becomes cheaper, which increases the adoption rate. In simplicity, as the price of this became cheaper and cheaper and inexpensive, more and more people, even with low incomes, were able to afford this technology. And think of anything from the microwave to TVs, radio, cell phones, I mean, any technology. And that's how it's easy for us to forecast the future about technological revolutions and what it will drive the fifth wave. The key, I'll say very quickly, is that this fifth wave is decentralized. It's really key. That is that we're going to go from mass production to local production, just because of the productivity and the benefits. Just as the cell phone and the internet is decentralized information, all the technologies that are emerging from Kondratieff's fifth wave will empower the individual. It's actually a book I'm working on, the decentralized renaissance, the empowerment of the individual. And it's simply these amount of technologies that are changing our world. And I'm talking about game changers. There's so many improvements and minor improvements in other technologies. But the key is, and the most important aspect, is to understand that all these technologies are changing economic growth and the paradigm. So in summary, the economic long wave is a social cycle. The up wave is driven by technologies, disruptive technologies that rocks our world. At its peak, it has regressive returns to the real economy. During the down wave, as the economy slows, the financial sector, because its product or service is credit, becomes cheaper, and people leverage and make the mistake that will continue forever. And we're at the end now, right? The financial renaissance is over because the secular rise in interest rates will now suppress asset prices. And then we get a deleveraging. And then that deleveraging allows the economy to restart, and new technologies will start the next cycle. And so we're completing Kondratieff's fourth wave. Probably within 2 decades, we'll start the next upwave. Last point, economic winters entail enormous amount of creative destruction. Everything changes. The political system will be last, but the economic structure, the education system, the healthcare system, structures within the economy, it will be changed. The financial sector will shrink dramatically. The governments, in this case, will shrink dramatically because the system isn't sustainable. And then as the technologies become cheaper and people adopt it, then this new economy will emerge because of the productivity. So think in the future, food and production of services and needs and wants will more than likely be produced locally because the cost effectiveness is there. Okay, so I hope this helps you to understand the long wave. It's a social cycle driven by technology, ends with unsustainable, unproductive debt, a cleansing, which we're about to go through, occurs, and then a next cycle will start at that point. And that is exciting because the amount of patent growth in these decentralized technology are booming. By the way, if there's any questions, I'm going to be putting this on YouTube and other places, just mark below and let me know. Was this simple enough? Was this clear enough? I'm working on improving this, but let me know if there's something you believe that I should interject. I can always record this. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.